Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Lorandom podcast. I'm your host, Peter Bauman, the editor-in-chief of Lorandom, and this week is a special week. It's Duo Week. Today, we are continuing our Friday podcast episodes as a companion to our Monday editorials, our Monday written pieces, and today's very special podcast episode is with the superstar artist duo of Anna Ridler and Sofia Crespo. And our editorial this Monday was with another superstar duo that is Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst. So I had an amazing conversation with Holly and Matt. It took hours and could have gone on for hours more, and really encourage you to check out that conversation at Lorandom Editorials. But today we are chatting with another wonderful duo, Anna Ridler and Sofia Crespo, about a big year for them. They released a project together this year, Long Short-Term Memories. They also won the Arab Bank Switzerland Artist of the Year. So we cover their early experiments with deep learning, how they both fuse natural history and machine learning, AI, and also the evolution of their now 5 collaborative projects together. So I enjoyed this chat a lot, and they also told me that it was their first time being interviewed together. So that makes it even more special. Wow, what a treat. I can't wait to share. So let's begin. Yeah, again, maybe we can go ahead and get started. Yeah, so there's kind of 2 main goals, and one is to talk about your earliest experiences with AI and deep learning, and then also to talk a lot about your collaboration. So maybe we can just start, chronologically at least, but talking about your first encounters with deep learning. And maybe we can start with Anna, but can you just tell us, how did you first learn and hear about deep learning? Because you two were some of the earliest to really start engaging with it artistically back in, as early as 2016, I believe. So
I was at the Royal College of Art when I started working with it, and I was mainly drawn to it because I was already working with large data and kind of thinking about how to display large amounts of information and what stories were in large amounts of information and how information could be used to think about the world in a different way, or kind of think about what is deemed important and what's not deemed important. And that all kind of stemmed from my abiding love of kind of like language and literature and dictionaries and encyclopedias, all of which are trying to kind of like categorize and kind of understand the world, which is what I studied originally at university. And so the kind of like interest in kind of like large data and kind of like this boom of kind of like large data, because at that time, like data visualization was this big thing that was kind of people were talking about. And from that kind of like thinking about that and looking at that and making work with that, there isn't a massive kind of leap to working with data sets. And from working with data sets, there's not a massive leap to working with machine learning more generally. So that's kind of like the route that I took to get into working with it.
I think for me, it started in a very different place to Anna's. For me, it started by being fascinated with memes and net art and thinking about my browser history, basically, like what is my browser exposed to on the day-to-day? What kind of information am I browsing, and what would I think of myself if I only saw my browser history and didn't know anything else about me? And that led me to think about, what do corporations know about me, that can see like my browser history? What kind of models are they training with my data? And then that led me to think about, how could I portray myself, like make a project about where you only see my browser history, basically. And I started kind of making this project called Trauma Doll. The idea behind it was basically like learning automatically, like to extract patterns from the information or the things that I was browsing. So eventually, like, that took a completely different turn when I started thinking about extracting patterns from the things that I was observing under the microscope. Then I switched completely to being interested in the internet as a thing of itself, like an ecosystem of itself, to looking at the natural world. And then it kind of like kickstarted the exploration that I still haven't, that I'm still continuing to explore today.
It's funny that you say that, Sophia, because I hadn't really realized that you like that was the kind of like beginning of your early work. Because in many ways, kind of like some of the early work that I did was also sort of I worked a lot with things like WikiLeaks and things like autocorrect, and looking at kind of what traces kind of remain on the internet when after a while, and kind of what how corporations push kind of different patterns onto you. So I think we both probably had kind of like really similar kind of like starts before kind of like coming to the world of like machine learning and natural history.
Yeah.
It's not maybe your first thought to go from natural history to then AI. Is there anything else you want to talk about there?
The way that I see it is kind of like a natural progression. It has some, even if it seems very separate from the outside, to this idea of like the internet and, looking at all these like information systems on the internet. It makes perfect sense to also look back in time, and specifically with a focus on the natural world, looking at how, as humans, we have tried to make sense of the world around us. We've tried to catalog it. We've tried to understand what ecosystem we are a part of. And in a way, there's a bit of that sense of struggle to it as well, where we can try all we want to categorize all the species in the planet, but we know that that's not enough. Like, we'll never really know what it is like to be another species. And so this kind of sense of incompleteness to it that I find very fascinating to look at. I know that, like, it's one of the things we share, this kind of interest in how historically, as humans, we have tried to understand the world.
Yeah. I totally agree with what Sophia was saying, because I think for me, at least, it's not about kind of nature or working with nature. It's about working with kind of natural history, which is different. It's kind of humans. It's like our perception of kind of what nature is and how nature kind of fits into a very human-centric kind of view of the world. And because natural history, in a way, even the term natural history is a very Enlightenment term. It's a term about kind of, as Sophia said, kind of like trying to break up and organize and order the world, which I think again has that strong parallels with what is happening and has happened with machine learning, with the kind of way that kind of like data sets and algorithms understand kind of certain things through kind of how the world has been kind of pieced and parceled and fed to them. And I think there's very much this kind of thing about how with natural history, you're kind of taking an object out of the world, that it's kind of the environment. Like when you kind of thinking about these herbariums, it's an object that is kind of like made clean and taken out of, and it's always in this perfect form. It's not kind of decaying or rotting, and found kind of like how it grows naturally. It's kind of preserved and kind of, made clean, and kind of the labor that kind of goes into kind of doing that work of finding it, pressing it, painting it, whatever, is obscured. And there's all sorts, I think, of really nice parallels between kind of like how kind of natural history has worked in the past and its function as part of science, and kind of like what's going on at the moment with machine learning, that for me makes it really powerful. And I think as well, kind of like going back to what we were talking about earlier, about how we were both really interested kind of like when we were kind of like starting out with the idea and the possibilities of working with machine learning, it was all about large sets of kind of information and data and corporations. And I think that I find it really powerful to make parallels to other instances where this has occurred. And natural history just seemed like such a obvious and clear fit for that. And I think it's been a really powerful one because it's something that we keep returning to again and again and again as a way of working.
Yeah, there's such a long history of those natural history systems and going back to Reynolds and the Boyd's algorithms and particle systems, and yeah, really trying to capture the world algorithmically and think about the world algorithmically, and then Anna, so you were talking about how natural history is this human-centric view of nature, and so yeah, I'm wondering, the post-humanist thought that runs through both of your work, I believe, did that come before your interest in deep learning?
At least speaking for myself, is something that emerged naturally. It's something that, as I was exploring, it was a bit like a feedback loop of between like what I was doing and asking myself different questions. So I would do something and then think, oh, like, what about this? What about what happened back in, like, I don't know, this period of time, or what about these other things? And that kind of led me to be curious and research, kind of like dive deeper into things that I was interested in. It emerged in a natural way for me. It wasn't something that I had fully researched before I started doing this. I don't know how it was for you, Anna.
I think, like, I don't know, it's always really hard to kind of, I think I've always had an abiding interest in it. I remember, like, when I was an undergrad, I wrote an essay like talking about scientific phenomenon when the language to talk about scientific phenomenon hadn't been invented yet. Like, how do you talk about electricity for the first time? And I think there's always been this kind of interest in kind of like, how do you describe and think about the world from like first principles? And I think one of the things that I kind of like, similar to Sofia, this kind of like looping, kind of like working and looping back and thinking and kind of like connecting. One of the ways that we both work is quite slowly and kind of methodic and kind of precisely and with a lot of attention. And I think that kind of gives the ability to kind of connect these different disparate thoughts together. I mean, I think nature in its own way is like, even the word nature is kind of like, in a weird way, kind of like difficult, because everything is natural, everything is in the universe, but there is this distinction that has been kind of made that something is kind of like real nature and fake nature. I think I've always been interested in it, but it's just the more that I've worked in this way, the more kind of refined that interest has become.
Yeah, that makes sense. And both of you were in the early NeurIPS creativity workshops, and I think that's really interesting. I think those are some of the more important, early AI and creativity just events that took place. And so Anna, your work was accepted in the first one in 2017. It was a paper that described the fall of the House of Usher. I guess I have a couple questions. Maybe the first one is, so was it only, you were using these really early GANs for fall of the House of Usher in I guess probably you would have started with them in 2016. So was it only Pix2Pix, or was there any other GAN technology you were using?
It was only Pix2Pix in that one, in the fall of the House of Usher. I can't even remember why at the time, but I think I just liked how it was working.
Yeah, no, it was definitely really popular back then, and yeah, I'm just wondering. So this early on, this was the first time that NeurIPS had a creativity workshop. Yeah, I just wonder, what was it like back then? I mean, did you feel like you were a tinkerer working with this technology in these primitive deep learning tools, or were you feeling more like an artist? Like, what was your kind of mindset back in those early days?
I felt more like an artist, because I was more interested in how I could use the technology within a kind of like broader artistic practice, because I had just kind of like come from the RCA doing lots of stuff with kind of technology in an art practice, although I did a very weird degree where it was, but I was very much like, I want to be an artist. I want to have an art practice. I don't want to be a creative technologist. I want to be an artist. And so I was more interested in finding a way to use these technologies in a way that could kind of like echo or bring out the central concept of the piece, rather than to maybe push them to their maximum kind of like, like ability, or to make them as kind of technically perfect as possible. And I remember I also did a keynote at a really early, not early, but at a European Computer Vision conference, like at the similar time, like I think about 2018, and all of the scientists were being like, we can help you fix this and make it look better. And I was like, but that's not the point. The point is that it's kind of like that it's flawed and that it's broken and that it doesn't work. I felt very much kind of like interested in that and wanting to push that. But I also remember at that time, there wasn't a lot of literacy in the broader kind of like with curators, or even kind of curators who specialized in digital art, as to what this technology was and how it could work. And so a lot of the time when I would give talks, a lot of the talk would be about what the technology is versus kind of like how I'm using it, why it's interesting. I don't know, like how you felt at the time, Sophia.
For me, it was very different because I didn't have a formal art education. I didn't even think that being recognized as an artist would ever, is a real possibility. Because I think there's something about the art education that it empowers you to believe that that's a real thing. But for me, it was like a far-fetched dream in a way, kind of like, okay, this is, I can only keep exploring this, but it doesn't mean that it's realistic. It started as like me just sharing my work online as kind of, I would explore a series and I would just make various iterations. And sometimes even these experiments, I didn't know where I was really trying to go. I didn't know really what I was trying to do. And I was kind of like figuring it out on the go. And I remember the first time that I got asked to write a statement about what I was doing. And I was like, I've never had to write a statement before. I mean, I don't even know what that really means. And doing that as an exercise kind of forced me to really reevaluate what I was doing, like at the meta level that I hadn't really thought about before. And as my work started getting exhibited, that gave me the confidence to continue exploring in a more planned manner, in a way that I was able to be more thinking in advance what I want to do before I do it. And so that completely changed my way of working. Yeah, like now I think about what I'm trying to do. So it's kind of like a fine balance between, because you always want to allow for unpredictable things to happen, right? You always want to allow to have some kind of communication with what you're doing and be able to like not be that rigid, that you're open to the process as well and where it can guide you, right? And I know that that's very alive when we work together, Anna, because it's very much like an intuitive process of figuring out what we are doing on the go.
Yeah.
Whereas now, like independently, we both have practices that are very focused on like what are we trying to do, and kind of like the exploration of how do we get there. Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I enjoy our collaboration so much, is because it takes me back to that time when I started, which was more about like, let's just do something and figure out what it is about as we're doing it.
Yeah. And I think it was like a time when there was, because the technology was much smaller, it was much easier to kind of like take something and just test it and kind of like get results really quickly and just mess about with it and train something up. And it does feel like substantially different, I think.
Yeah.
And I know in 2016 and 2017, you must have been, well, you mentioned Pix to Pix. Did you work with anything before that, with any DC GANs or VAEs or anything like that?
That was kind of like my kind of like first kind of like entry into kind of deep learning, but my first kind of experiments with AI were probably a bit earlier, around language and around kind of like trying to kind of decode speech to text algorithms, and kind of like see what was going on there.
And Sophia, what was it for you?
Yeah, I think it was neural style. I mean, and it still is. Like, I'm still running it the way that I was running it at that time, basically. It's just I have more GPU power now, so it has a better resolution. But I would dare to say, like, it will always be neural style.
Yeah, it's just
That's
like I can't ever not use a GAN in my project. There's always one somewhere, like at some point. It's just there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in touch with Leon recently, and because it was the 10-year anniversary of NST, and yeah, it'd be really fun to talk to Leon and about that, and I hope we can figure that out. But Anna was at the 2017 NeurIPS ML Creativity Conference, and then or presented.
Yeah, I didn't go.
Yeah,
I remember like my computer science friends just being like, what kind of poster is this? Because it was just like the entire poster was just images and like a tiny little bit of text at the bottom.
Sorry, Sophia, you went in 2020, I think, and
oh yeah, I think this was just an exhibition then. Okay, sorry, this was an online talk.
Because it was the COVID year.
Yeah.
Those were still definitely the early days in 2020.
I was so nervous because I was the first speaker opening of the conference, and I didn't know, like how people would react to my work. Would they think, oh, this is just a naive way of looking at the technologies that they're developing? Like the people developing the tools that I'm using are sitting there. I was very surprised with how excited people were afterwards. Also to meet people that are so specialized in very, very niche areas of machine learning, that really shows you how diverse the field is. Whereas we think about AI as this kind of like monolithic thing, like it's just this one thing, but really it's a lot of things. It's a lot of small things, and without each of these parts of the puzzle, we wouldn't have the tools that we have.
I think it's a good opportunity to get really into the the collaboration and that part of this discussion. And your first collaboration was 2023, and that was various and casual Occursions. But when did you two actually first meet or encounter the other's work, and how did the collaboration begin?
So I've always kind of like, I can't remember not knowing Sofia's work because she was always like so present on the internet, and her work is always was and is so beautiful that I think it was always kind of like there, and kind of like the background of kind of like thinking about who is doing what in this space. But the first time we met was in 2018 at a show that was put on in Hanover. But it was a really, really good show with lots of people who were at that time kind of like working with the stuff. And they flew us all out there. And it like Sugwon was there, Sofia, you were there, Mario was there. And it just, Matthew Plummer Fernandez was there. And I don't know, it was just like a really nice opening. Like it was just like, the vibes were really good. Everyone was in a really good mood. Like I just remember because it was the first time I met Sugwon, and I became really close. I really like her, and I'm friends with her. And Sophia was there, and that's the first time we talked. And I met Felican as well. Unbeknownst to me, I met Felican. He was just introduced as like a person who was with Sophia. And it was just like such a wonderful time, and we just really hit it off and became friends, and just kind of chatted online since then.
Yeah, I remember Mario Klingemann was there as well. It was a really cool exhibition. I remember that I showed Trauma Doll back then, which was, like this massive blowout prints of my browser history. And I remember that there were so many embarrassing things here and there, and thinking like, oh my God, we are going to see this and now know who the person behind it is. It was a really cool show. I wish that we could make a reunion of that show because it was, yeah, it was
And
a
because
lot
they
of fun.
gave us so much space and because at the time, I think it was
Yeah,
the first time when the kind of broader kind of like early AI art was being exhibited as artworks and not just like as an explainer of how AI works. And it was like everything was really well produced, and it was just really, I think, a really well done show with really like lots of people kind of like working in really different ways, but all kind of like trying to explore kind of critically how the thing worked.
yeah, absolutely. It was really ahead of its time in a way.
Yeah,
Because they were even showing like sculptural pieces in a very ambitious ways. There were performances. There was a performance by Suguen, I remember. But they also had, yeah, like Mario's piece running in real time. It was very cool.
yeah. And I think they also had some pieces that were really thinking about kind of like the kind of like ethics of algorithms alongside people who had kind of been working with this stuff for like a bit longer time scales. And it was just I thought it was a really interestingly curated show, especially for one that was done so early.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
few of these early 20, like even 2016, but yeah, 17 and 18 shows that often get overlooked today, but that were really seminal. And then if you met in 2018, do you want to say anything more about how by 2023 you were doing a collaboration together? Like, so how did it go from you meet and then maybe you get in touch with each other from here and there, but then how did that go from a collaboration?
We just kind of like, I don't know, it's like how kind of like friendships just grow. I mean, we were never really in the same city. I mean, again, were we until we collaborated? I don't think we showed again because then it was COVID, and then I kind of like was out of the scene for a little bit having my babies. We just became really close. I don't know how it happened. It just clicked.
Oh, yeah, I think because we both know Luba Elliott,
Yeah.
and she was curating a show for Unit London. And I remember that she asked both of us independently, and then we were chatting, and I remember we both like, oh yeah, like I'm so excited to, work with Luba again. And we're like, what if we do something together?
Yeah.
Like make something really special for her because she was really,
She was a
yeah,
really Luba is a really, I think, pivotal figure in kind of like early AI art scene, and particularly living in London, the meetups that she'd put on. I mean, I probably saw you speak at one of her meetups before we became friends, because she, I think, fostered the community a lot. Both of us are like, if Luba asked us to do something, we will obviously do it. And it was just a really nice, she was, and that particular show that she was doing for Unit was bringing together a lot of people who'd been working, the earlier people who'd been working in the space for a while. So it was a really nice time to kind of like come together and actually make something together. I have done collaborations in the past, and sometimes they work out incredibly well, and sometimes they are a complete disaster. So I think we were both a little bit nervous deciding to make something together, because you're never sure if it's like dating your friend. You're never sure if it's just going to turn out to be wonderful and you end up married, or if you just like never speak to them again because it's such a disastrous process. And I think we were both a bit nervous when we decided to collaborate together, especially because, doing it remotely, not being in the same city, but it ended up just being like such a lovely way of working. And I think it really opened up a different part of my practice.
yeah, and likewise. And I remember that you told me you would travel to Portugal and you came with your whole family basically. And that was something I really enjoyed about our work, that we got to make the data set together.
Yeah.
I remember that you flew in with a Ziploc bag of plants from your garden. And I was like, this is amazing. And then we just, because I don't really have like a garden, I have like a kind of like a little backyard and doesn't have a lot of plants in it. So we went to a park nearby where I always go for walks, and we picked, even we were there with your baby and our
Yeah.
partners, and we just picked plants, and that was kind of like what we ended up using in the piece. Is we used the combination of these plants that were kind of part of our local environment in a way, to symbolize the first time our worlds kind of come together to create something. So in a way, that's what,
And I
ended
think
up becoming really meaningful.
I
Yeah.
I really love that piece that we made. And I think also what was really nice about it is that Sofia talked about it earlier, is that unlike kind of like our projects that we do and our kind of like individual practices, it was very fluid how it would end up. We kind of knew that we wanted to work with certain processes, particularly around kind of creating the data set, using the way of kind of like printing without the chlorophyll in the plant. And we knew we wanted to use that. But beyond that, we weren't really sure how the piece was going to come together. Being together in the same space, because we've, like most of our work now, we do, like, we just need to be together for tiny amounts of time, but it's so generative, like everything comes alive and all of our ideas just kind of like ricochet off each other and kind of become this work really quickly. Yeah, we just started off quite small with this kind of like, we're going to make something, I'll come to Lisbon, we'll see what happens, to this. And it just happened so quickly, like within a few days, that we kind of generated the work.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that Luba was involved. And yeah, I of course agree that she's such an important part to those early AI and creativity days that, pre-2020. And speaking of which, the work is also a celebration of women in science. And why was that important for you two for your first piece? So was that just the exhibition, or why was that something that you wanted to highlight on your first piece together?
It's about Anna Atkins and her kind of, or partly inspired by Anna Atkins and the way that she would kind of work with emerging kind of photographic methods to kind of document the world, which obviously has kind of like played a huge part in Sofia's practice, but also kind of like in a kind of like lesser, kind of like more low-key way in how I kind of like have been thinking about data sets and kind of like observing and attention and building. And she was a British woman who would kind of like comb the seashore to kind of find these things, which obviously has echoes to the way that I would go and find things like the shells for my various shell projects. I think we both consider a long kind of like tale of science and kind of who is remembered and who is not remembered, I suppose. Part of our practice, or part of my practice at least, is to kind of like think about those things and unpick it and question it and query it. And I think that naturally comes through into the collaboration with Sofia, because that's also there with her. It wasn't necessarily, I think, a conscious choice when we sat down to kind of decide to collaborate, but it certainly was something that kind of naturally just fell out when we started making this work.
Yeah, and I think it's also because one thing that we shared and we discovered early on is that we were interested in kind of like digging data sets, but also like natural history references. And Anna Atkins is a big one in a way, but often you would think that she is as known as other, like it makes you really think, like, how much credit did she really get during her time? How much credit does she get today? Because her work was really pivotal. She published the first book of photographs. I mean, that's a big thing, right, in history of photography. Yeah, it's like the first person to publish a book of photographs was a woman that was trying to study as a botanist the natural world. And so what she did was really innovative, like kind of this using this camera-less technique to create like a different impression, or obtain a different impression that wasn't that of desiccating the specimens, right? So that's something that's fascinating that she's both like doing science, creating like a record of something that exists in the natural world, and that also she's doing something artistic. So it was kind of like this fascinating intersection of all those worlds coming together. Yeah, it felt natural to just do something that referenced her work in a way.
That's really interesting to hear more of that backstory. And then in further along in 2023, you had your second collaboration. So it happened, the second one happened pretty quickly after the first. And that was 83 Seeds from a Vanishing Mountain. That one is more of this reflection on climate change and ecologies. But you mentioned that that kind of nervousness about whether or not you might want to work again together, or release a second album as a band. How did you think about that? It seemed like it was once you had done the first one, it was really easy to think about doing the second one together. Is that right?
I think it was partly Mimi, Mimi from Gwen Wahed now. She asked us, would you be open to doing something together again? And would you be open to this time producing a physical piece for display? And we were like, okay, well, last time we only had the chance to exhibit digitally. So, but we did produce physical prints with the work. I mean, the whole data set is physical. We had to scan it to be able to create the digital image, right? We thought, okay, well, this time we could work the other way around. We could work with a digital data set, but end up producing a physical piece. In a way, it became kind of like the work turned into a shape of its own that we definitely didn't see coming, because we broke it up into a grid, but then it felt natural to mint each of these images of the grid separately as a token, right?
Yeah.
It's something that made us think about the seeds kind of like spreading. Yeah.
And also, one of the things about what we were interested in about minting each tile as a grid, which is something that kind of like also kind of comes out in one of our later works, the clematis piece, was about reconfiguring it, because when you go on and search for it, it's not shown as like the perfect image. They kind of like, if you go onto kind of like a marketplace, it will kind of like be reconfigured. And so thinking about kind of things getting mixed up and jumbled, and kind of that it not existing in a perfect form, but in a way that kind of like, and it's still working as an artwork, and how things travel and how things kind of like are kept and kind of like saved. And I think that's something else that kind of like does also come out in different kind of like iterations of our work, that it's not necessarily, as Sofia said, it's not a fixed thing. It can kind of transform and transmute. And even things like, we've worked with Polaroids and we've worked with cyanotypes, that they don't last forever, that there is this inherent kind of like shifting and decay and kind of things like that is kind of embedded also in the piece.
That kind of temporality that you mentioned, that seems to also be a theme of your third collaboration together. So that was Snapshots, Orchids, and which also seems to play on some of those themes. What this piece, you seem to be encouraging the audience to reflect and to slow down and to contemplate. And so another 2023 work. So again, you had your first three collaborations were in 2023 and happened pretty, close to each other. So yeah, what inspired this third work, and how do you see it as an extension of maybe the previous two?
Yeah, so at that point we had worked with one technique that none of us had worked with. That was the printing on photographic paper using camera-less technique, basically with a chlorophyll. Then we worked with a cyanotype technique, which is one that I had been working with, and it felt natural to then explore one that Anna had been working with, which was the Polaroid printing. And it kind of felt like Yeah, like a natural progression of the works, like to keep exploring things that we're both interested, but we're also reflect a little bit of our worlds coming together.
Yeah, and with this one, we kind of went through all of our archives of our photographs and combined all the pictures of orchids that we'd taken over the years. Because when you were in London, you went to Kew and you saw all of the orchids, and it kind of like was directly inspired by kind of that. And because I think one of the things that is really magical about working with Sofia on these projects is that it is very responsive to kind of what we're thinking and doing and seeing kind of like when we start to work on it. And it's kind of like it's very kind of reactive to the moment, which is a really lovely quality that I find kind of like very nice and refreshing.
Yeah, I remember that I was at the Kew Gardens and I sent Anna a picture of an orchid that had the color palette that we had been working with. And I was like, wow, this is our orchid. And Anna was like, oh my God, I love orchids. And I have so many pictures of them. And then when Mimi asked us to work on a second piece, it felt like, okay, let's do something about orchids. We both find orchids fascinating and we both have taken a lot of pictures of them. So what if we use what we have as part of the data set? Yeah, and I think there's also a large element of collage in our work too that kind of comes together because all of our works are in a way like an assemblage of different things. There's a lot of that. Like I remember, Anna, that we had talked about the collage practice of Victorian women. That was something that you were really interested in, and I thought was that was really fascinating.
Yeah, because I think there's something really interesting about how collage and kind of like and its relationship to photography has always been there. That there's been this kind of movement, particularly kind of like with scrapbooking, which again is kind of like seen or slightly dismissed as kind of an artistic practice, where if you don't have the world that you want, you kind of quite literally cut and reconfigure representations of the world to make something that does exist. And I think there is this kind of slipperiness, I think, to kind of like early collage and photography, where it's kind of like where it was viewed with a lot of suspicion because it was, remaking the world in the way. And there are like some really nice parallels to kind of like the moment that we're in at the moment with deepfakes and AI and reconfiguring the world and not being, there being kind of like a real anxiety around whether what you see is true or false. I think there was also that kind of like questions around that have been asked throughout history around with photography being a medium that is so closely associated with truth. There are these kind of ways of kind of manipulating it, and there always have been.
I also see these parallels to what you were talking about earlier with who gets credit in science, because it seems like when men artists started working with collage, then it was accepted. When Brock does it's accepted, but as fine art, but it had historically been looked down upon. I suppose that brings us to the fourth collaboration, which was this year, and that is long short-term memories, sketches from a garden in Argentina. This is another dialogue with Polaroids and photography and memory and reproduction. Anna, you kind of touched on it a bit, but how is this work a reflection on how you're both thinking about how art's changed now when now we're in this age of artificial reproduction? We were in the age of mechanical reproduction. Now it's the age of artificial reproduction. So yeah, was that something you were thinking about with this work?
Yeah, I think at the time that this work took place, I was actually physically in Argentina. And I remember that we started talking about what we would do. And Anna had previously traveled to Argentina as well and collected a lot of pictures. And we started thinking about how every time that we recall a memory, we are somehow rewiring that memory. So we are kind of like recreating it. And that led us to think about this, like how, every time that we work with the images of a data set that we captured at a moment in time, we are kind of like creating a new experience of that. And it fitted very well with our way of working, our way of collaging, which has a bit of memory in it as well, because we are sometimes using images on the data set that we took many years ago, that we weren't thinking, oh, this was going to become a data set. And it's not necessarily something that was like very polished and thought out at the moment that we captured it, right? There's that element of what is instantaneous, what happened in a moment. And that's something that the Polaroid has, that is like this capture, like this snapshot of something, right? Because the Polaroid gets printed instantly, right, in the moment that you're taking it. And we thought about like, what are these artificial memories? What would it look like to print these artificial memories of a trip to Argentina, that we never did together yet? Hopefully we will.
Yeah.
And we started kind of like collaging some of those images. And at the same time, it felt natural to create in a way, some kind of like collaged data set as well. So like, I remember Anna said, what if we show the data set and the work next to each other as part of the same work, so that people understand that we are making our own data sets as well? Because I remember around the time that we published this work, there was a lot of controversy around the Christie's auction. There was a group of artists that wrote like an open letter to Christie's asking them to stop the auction. And the main concern behind it was that the artists working with AI are using stolen data, right, from other artists. But that's not necessarily true. And not all of AI has to work that way. It just felt important for us to, in a way, respond to that by showing, look, we are artists, we're working with this technology, but we're also working with our own data sets. That is actually possible. And we did it in a subtle way. I mean, obviously, like the work itself is, like doesn't have this controversy as a subject, but it took in a
informed
shape
it.
that, yeah, absolutely.
And maybe I can also ask about your fifth and final collaboration, which is Clematis Armandii. So you seem to work with each other in spurts. So 2023, you had these 3 collaborations, and now 2025, you have the second one. And so can you tell us more about your last project that you worked on together?
The clematis piece that we did, which is an instance where we're kind of thinking about how work exists in kind of like online and offline, and how it will fade and decay, and responding to the moment. And what I really like about this project is that we made it at almost exactly the same point in the year that we made our first project. And in our first project, one of the flowers that I carried over to Lisbon in my Ziploc bag is actually the clematis flower that this entire piece is kind of blown up and made out of. It's a flower that flowers very, very briefly at the start of spring, that I kind of documented in various different ways, from when it started to bloom to kind of like it fading away, which happens rapidly. And then we made this work, and I really like this one, because it also, the way that Sofia printed it, there are kind of traces of the weather that happened when she was, and it's this real kind of like, I think it's a very moment, it captures this kind of, this coming of spring, both in kind of terms of plant and weather.
Yeah, and something that was interesting about it was that as the prints were hung outside to dry, I wasn't expecting that it would rain, because the weather forecast said that it would just be clear sky all day. And it was nighttime, so the printing happened during nighttime, because that's kind of like makes it easier to regulate with the light. And there are a lot of tiles. This work is actually quite large. It's more than 2 meters long, and I don't remember how many tiles, but it's something like 80 or even 90 tiles, something like that, right?
Because I think that's another thing that I think ties a lot of our collaborations together is the scale that normally that we're taking kind of things that are often small and overlooked and then making them into these quite large scale kind of like high resolution pieces.
Yeah. And as the work, as these like single tiles were hanging outside, it suddenly started raining. I was like, okay, this is supposed to dry, but now everything is getting wet again. But it was just a light rain that passed. But the funny thing, like the next day, when I took the prints back in, I noticed that the rain had left a mark, like a chemical reaction with the paper. And you can see it in the work. You can actually see like the drips of the rain. And this is something that's kind of really beautiful. It made me think in a way of land art somehow, how we're interacting with the natural elements and how they're becoming part of the printing process too. So there's something that, yeah, that I still like really love about this work is that effect of the rain being printed on the paper as well. But also the thing that this work has is it has something algorithmic to it as well, because we started thinking about like what are all the possible arrangements of this artwork? What does it mean for us to make an artwork that can be displayed in like an infinite, almost infinite number of ways, you know? We chose to give this work not just the name of the species that we use for the data set, but also the formula of the amount of times you can actually display this artwork, all the possible permutations that it can have if you place the tiles in a different order. And this is the first work for which we actually created its own dedicated website that's running on a server that's actually rendering constantly a new permutation of the work. So this is kind of like the first time we did something different that comes with this kind of digital component as well. But also knowing that this isn't eternal, you know, we don't know like how long this server will be running, you know, like whatever might happen, right? Taking this as a kind of like a substrate in a way in which, yeah, this work is being like re-rendered and just temporarily it's living there as well.
Is there anything that you wanted to add about any final thoughts or anything, any kind of connective tissue between these projects and anything about the future in the last few minutes?
I think that it's just, I hope that Sophia and I will keep collaborating, but it's very, I think it's one of the things that is so joyous about it is that it's just very unpredictable when it will happen. So I don't know when our next one will be or what it will be about. I hope that it will be soon, and I think that we will come up with something really interesting because there is just so much I think that we have in common kind of across our individual practices, right down to kind of like weird, very obscure horticulture that we both independently discover and make work about. We see the world, I think, in very similar ways and think about things in very similar ways, that it's nice to kind of like explore this kind of like within kind of like our individual practices and to kind of think through things and then to come together and kind of really rush and produce and make something responds to everything else that we've been thinking about.
Something that's really cool is that Anna and I are working on a project now as part of our ABS prize. So we can't announce very much at the moment, but next year we will have something coming up in a very different shape, something that we've never done before. So yeah, look forward to sharing about that when the time comes.
Yeah, I got to go to that dinner and award ceremony in Basel earlier this year. So yeah, congratulations on the award, and yeah, very excited about what you have upcoming next year. And yeah, thank you both so much for taking the time. And it was really interesting. I can't believe it was the first time you've been interviewed together. So
yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and I'll speak to
yeah,
you probably both later.
bye, Anna. Thank
Bye.
you.
Okay, bye bye.